She was just a poor girl trying to survive, cleaning the cold halls of a billion-dollar empire. He was the ruthless CEO with a heart no one could touch. But one clumsy moment, one accidental touch, changed everything. What started as an awkward mistake became a forbidden connection and turned into the kind of love that breaks rules, melts walls, and challenges a cruel, judgmental world. This is not just a love story, it's a story of hope, heartbreak, and the courage to love beyond status. Grace Miller's life had never been easy. She grew up in a rusty trailer on the edge of a forgotten town in rural Georgia, the kind of place where dreams got smaller the older you got. Her father had vanished when she was only 6. One morning, he left to get some air, and the air swallowed him whole. He never came back. Her mother, sweet, stubborn, and worn from years of backbreaking work, became both mom and dad. She cleaned houses by day and waited tables by night, returning home with sore feet and calloused hands. They shared everything. One bedroom, one heater, and one dream, that someday Grace would live a better life. Grace had always been different. She wasn't loud, she wasn't flashy, but she believed in something bigger. Books became her best friends. She read by candlelight when the power went out. When other kids bought snacks with lunch money, Grace saved every penny in a cracked mason jar labeled someday. Then her mother fell sick. The hospital bills came fast like bullets. Grace dropped out of community college to work at a diner. But one day as her mother lay sleeping, pale and breathless, Grace looked out the window and whispered, "I can't wait anymore. I have to go." With just $200, one duffel bag, and her mother's locket around her neck, she boarded a midnight bus to New York City. The city was chaos, loud and cold. She slept in cheap hostels, skipped meals, and scoured job boards. People passed her like she was invisible. But then, finally, a chance came. Blackridge Corporation, a name she'd heard in passing, a world so far from hers it felt like fiction. They needed night cleaners. No experience necessary, just hard work. On her first day, she woke before sunrise. She pressed her old, oversized uniform with a borrowed iron. Her shoes were scuffed and thin, and her nerves were loud in her chest. As she stepped into the glittering skyscraper, it felt like walking into a glass castle where she didn't belong. The marble floors reflected her awkward steps. People in suits walked by without so much as a glance. She heard heels click, phones ring, and not one voice say her name. But she didn't flinch. She wasn't here to be seen. She was here to survive. "Clean the executive floor," her supervisor barked, handing her a cart with supplies. Grace nodded, gripping the cart like it was her anchor. The elevator ride was silent but heavy. When the doors opened, she stepped into another world. Carpets so soft they swallowed sound, desks that smelled like money, and glass offices that sparkled like stars. As she started to clean, her hands shook a little. She took deep breaths and reminded herself, "You are not less. You are just new. And one day you won't be cleaning these halls. You'll be walking them with pride." She moved quietly, humming under her breath like her mother used to, dusting desks, wiping mirrors, emptying bins, each task a small act of dignity. She caught glimpses of herself in the glass, frail, nervous, too small for the room. But deep in her chest burned a spark. This is only the beginning. The floor was silent until a voice suddenly echoed from the far end of the hall. Deep, stern, male. Her heart jumped. "Careful with that bus. It's older than most countries." She turned quickly, cheeks flushed, ready to apologize. But the hallway was empty, just a shadow vanishing into a corner office. Her pulse quickened. She didn't know it yet, but that voice belonged to him. The man whose world would crash into hers in the most unexpected, intimate way. And though Grace had no clue what tomorrow held, she didn't know that a single accident, one small, clumsy moment, would change her entire life, forever. The second day at Blackridge started like the first, early, cold, and quiet. Grace had barely slept. Her nerves were louder than the city traffic outside her window. But she reminded herself why she was here: to survive, to fight for her mother, to build something better. "Executive floor again," her supervisor said without even looking up from his clipboard. Grace nodded, even though her stomach turned. Most janitors whispered stories about that floor, how cameras caught everything, how no one smiled, how he walked those halls like a ghost in a $10,000 suit. She wheeled her cart into the silent hallway, the wheels squeaking like they didn't belong. Everything was gleaming, untouched, almost like the world up here didn't even need cleaning. But she got to work, humming quietly to calm herself. As she neared the end of the hall, near the CEO's private office, a strange chill crept up her spine. The air felt heavier here. The walls were too quiet. She adjusted her grip on the mop, trying to be extra careful. Then, without warning, a deep voice, smooth but sharp, sliced through the silence. Someone missed a spot. Startled, Grace gasped and spun around too fast. Her heel slipped on the still damp floor. Her hand jerked upward, the mop flying, and she tumbled forward. Her hands reached out to catch herself. One hand landed on cool marble. The other landed somewhere warm, firm, and definitely not appropriate. Time stopped. She looked up and saw him, Alexander Blackridge, the CEO, the man who built the company from scratch, the man with the icy eyes and a reputation that made grown men sweat. And Grace Miller had just accidentally groped him. Her heart jumped into her throat. Her entire body flushed crimson as she yanked her hand back like it had caught fire. I didn't mean, oh my God, I'm sorry. I wasn't looking. I was just mopping. Please don't. She was already mentally packing her bags. Fired, sued, thrown out onto the sidewalk, maybe even on the news. She opened her mouth to beg when something impossible happened. Alexander's lips twitched, and then he laughed. Not a chuckle, not a smirk. A real, deep, surprised laugh that echoed in the hallway like thunder breaking glass. Grace blinked. Was this a trap? Was he laughing before calling security? "You've got quite the reflexes," he said, brushing down his tailored suit like nothing had happened. "Next time, aim for the shoulder." She opened her mouth but couldn't speak. Her throat was dry, her heart pounding. He stared at her then. Really looked. Not like a man inspecting a cleaner, but like a man seeing something unexpected. Something rare. "Grace Miller," he said, glancing at her ID badge. "I'll remember that name." He turned and walked away, leaving her trembling by the mop cart, mouth hanging open. The next few minutes felt like a dream. Did that really just happen? Did she really just touch the most feared man in the building there and live to tell about it? And why did he laugh? She cleaned the rest of the floor in a daze, her cheeks still burning. But she didn't know that this was only the beginning. That one clumsy moment, one humiliating accident, would be the spark that melted the frozen wall around Alexander Blackridge's heart. And she certainly didn't know that she had just stepped into a love story no one saw coming. Grace expected the worst after the accidental incident. She thought she'd be pulled into HR, handed a termination letter, maybe even escorted out. But the next morning her ID still worked. Her name was still on the schedule. And even stranger, people were whispering about something. She didn't know it yet, but word had traveled fast. The CEO, Alexander Blackridge, had smiled, laughed even, and with the janitor. That alone was unheard of. Later that afternoon, she was cleaning the lobby when a tall shadow fell across her mop bucket. She looked up, eyes wide. It was him, Alexander, in another perfect charcoal suit, holding 2 coffee cups. "I ordered one too many," he said, his voice even and unreadable. "Figured you'd need a pick-me-up." He handed her the cup and walked away without waiting for a thank you. Grace stood frozen, heart racing. Why was he being kind? Over the next few days, things got weirder. He greeted her by name. He asked how her mother was doing, something she hadn't told anyone in the building. Once she dropped a stack of paper towels in the hallway, and he bent to help her pick them up. The CEO helping the janitor. It made no sense, at least not until she saw it in his eyes. The same tiredness she carried, the same quiet weight behind his shoulders. What no one at Blackridge Corporation knew was that Alexander Blackridge wasn't born into luxury. He didn't come from wealth. He came from chaos. As a child, he'd been passed from one foster home to another. Never chosen, never loved. He'd slept on floors, learned to hide food in pillowcases, and stopped trusting anyone before he turned 10. The suit, the power, the coldness, it was all armor. Armor he'd worn for decades to survive a world that only respected money. But when Grace touched him that day, when she panicked, blushed, and stammered like a terrified kitten, something cracked. Not because of the accident, but because she didn't look at him like a billionaire. She looked at him like a human being, and that was something he hadn't felt in years. He started looking for her more often, not stalking, just noticing. Her gentle way of greeting the front desk staff who ignored her. The way she cleaned with care, even when no one was watching. The way she smiled at old security guards and left notes beside their coffee mugs. She treated every person with respect, even though not one of them treated her like she mattered. He admired that. And then, late one night, he pulled out an old worn box from the back of his closet. Inside, a picture of a scared boy in a dirty sweater, clutching a broken toy. And next to it, a tattered note written on an old napkin. Kindness is your real inheritance. Don't forget that. His mother's last message before the system took him away. That night, Alexander sat alone in his office, staring out over the glittering city lights. He had everything now, money, power, fame, but he hadn't let anyone close in over a decade. Not until Grace. And still, he told himself it was nothing. Just curiosity. Just kindness in return. Nothing more. But his heart was already stirring. Quietly. Dangerously. Because Grace Miller didn't just remind him of where he came from. She reminded him of who he really was. Beneath the armor, beyond the empire, behind the title. And that terrified him more than anything. The storm rolled in like a warning. Thunder growled above New York City as rain lashed against the Blackridge Tower's tall windows. It was nearly 11 p.m., and most of the building had emptied. But not Grace. She had stayed behind to finish the executive floor. She didn't want to be accused of slacking, especially not up here. As she polished the last glass wall, the lights above flickered once. Then again. She paused, heart skipping. Outside, lightning cracked like the sky was splitting open. Inside, a sudden buzz of static, then silence, then darkness. Emergency lights kicked in, dim and eerie, casting long shadows over the glossy floor. Grace packed her supplies quickly. Elevator's probably down, she thought, wiping her damp palms on her uniform. She headed to the stairwell, but when she pushed the door, it didn't budge. Locked. She tried the other exit. Locked, too. Panic fluttered in her chest. She wasn't just trapped on the top floor. She was trapped, alone, or so she thought. A quiet click echoed behind her. She turned. There, in the soft red glow of the emergency lights, stood Alexander Blackridge. Still in his suit, tie loosened, sleeves rolled, looking less like a CEO and more like a man who didn't belong to the storm outside. He raised an eyebrow. Locked out, too? She nodded, her voice caught in her throat. Yeah, I think the stairwell auto-locks after hours. He sighed and stepped past her. Typical. They'll reset it in the morning. Might as well get comfortable. She blinked. Wait, you mean we're stuck? Here? He gave a small, dry smile. Afraid so. The silence stretched between them like fabric pulled too tight. She stood awkwardly near the door, hands clasped. He leaned against his office desk, watching the rain streak down the massive window. Minutes passed. Then he said softly, You look terrified. Grace chuckled nervously. I'm not great with being stuck. Neither am I. She dared to move closer, still hesitant. So, what do CEOs do when they're trapped in offices with janitors? He looked at her, really looked. And then he said something that knocked the air out of her lungs. Talk, if the janitor's willing. So they talked. At first about safe things. Weather, coffee, floors she'd cleaned, clients he hated. But slowly the conversation deepened. Grace opened up about her mother's illness, about growing up with empty cabinets and rain coming through the ceiling, about the nights she went to bed hungry and dreamed of warm kitchens and working lights. Alexander listened, silent, still, but his eyes held shadows, not pity, recognition. He told her about the foster homes, the cold breakfasts, the kids who got adopted while he stayed behind. He told her he'd build his empire so no one could ever make him feel small again. Then, silence. Not the awkward kind, the honest kind. The kind that only exists when two souls see each other naked. Not with eyes, but with understanding. Grace reached for her mother's locket around her neck. It gave her comfort. Alexander noticed. "You wear it every day," he said softly. She nodded. "It reminds me who I'm doing this for." He smiled faintly. "You're stronger than half the people I hire." She looked up. "You don't have to be so guarded, you know." He froze. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I see the real you, Alexander. Not the headlines, not the billions. Just the man." His eyes shimmered, just for a second. And then he took her hand. It was warm, trembling, unsure. "No one," he said slowly, "talks to me like a real person anymore." Her heart thudded. She didn't pull away. Their fingers tangled. Their eyes met. And in that fragile, flickering light, in the middle of a thunderstorm in a tower too tall, something broke open. He leaned in, slow and uncertain. She didn't stop him. Their lips met, soft at first, a question, then deeper, warmer, like a secret finally shared. It wasn't just a kiss. It wasn't about lust or loneliness. It was two broken people finding shelter in each other's arms. The storm outside raged on, but inside that office, for the first time in years, both Grace and Alexander felt peace. The morning after the storm, the world outside Black Ridge's walls felt normal. Bright skies, honking taxis, people rushing with coffee cups. But inside the building, whispers moved faster than footsteps. Someone had taken photos. A blurry shot of Grace walking out of the CEO's private office just after sunrise. Her hair slightly tousled, her cheeks still pink. And Alexander standing at the door, watching her leave with an expression no one had ever seen on him before. Software human, maybe even tender. The photos hit the company gossip thread by 9 a.m. By 10 a.m., they were on social media. Mop Girl and the Mogul, from Dustpan to Dynasty, the CEO's dirty little secret. Grace had no idea until her locker was surrounded by people whispering too loudly. "Did you hear she slept her way up? I bet she set the whole thing up. Poor little thing with a plan. She probably spilled her mop water on him and then fell into his bed." Her stomach dropped. She ran to the bathroom, locked herself in a stall, and stared at the floor until her vision blurred. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Unknown numbers, voicemails, media messages. She couldn't breathe. All she'd ever wanted was to earn her place, to survive with dignity, not to be laughed at, not to be a headline. She took off her badge, grabbed her bag, and walked straight to the HR office. "I want to resign," she said, her voice flat. But before the HR manager could speak, a familiar voice rang out from behind her. "You're not going anywhere." Grace turned. It was Alexander. His suit was sharp, his jaw tight, but his eyes, they were fierce, protective. "I don't care what they say," he said, voice steady. "They don't know you, but I do." She stared at him, trembling. "I didn't ask for any of this." "I know," he said, "but I'm not ashamed of you. And I won't let the world treat you like something you're not." What followed shocked everyone. Alexander called an emergency press conference. Reporters gathered like vultures, expecting a denial, a spin, a damage control speech. Instead, Alexander stepped up to the microphone and said, "There are rumors about my relationship with one of our employees. I won't deny them." Gasps rippled through the crowd. He continued, "Her name is Grace Miller. She's one of the hardest working people I've ever met. She's honest, kind, and strong. And yes, I'm falling in love with her." Silence fell. Cameras flashed, mouths dropped. In the following days, media outlets tore into them. Headlines accused Grace of being a manipulator, a social climber, a fraud. But Alexander refused to back down. He removed her from cleaning duties, not to protect his image, but to protect her. He offered her a role in the charitable wing of the company, a place where her voice could matter. She tried to decline, still hurting, still humiliated. But he told her, if you hide, they win. But if you rise, they'll have to rewrite the story. Then one day he took her somewhere unexpected, to his old neighborhood. The streets were cracked, the buildings worn down, kids played with broken toys near fire hydrants, and Alexander walked through it like a man remembering every ache. This is where I grew up, he said, standing in front of a sagging duplex. Before the money, before the suits, before anyone called me sir. Grace looked up at him, tears in her eyes. You're not ashamed? He turned to her and smiled. Ashamed? Number, I'm proud. I just stopped showing people until you. Hand in hand, they stood on that sidewalk, just a janitor and a billionaire. No cameras, no press, just two hearts, scarred but brave. And in that moment, the world didn't matter. Because real love doesn't bow to gossip. It stands up. It speaks out. It holds tight, even when everyone else lets go. The storm of headlines eventually faded. Scandals lost their shock. Gossip found new victims, and the world moved on. But Grace Miller did not fade. She rose. Alexander didn't shelter her in a golden cage. He empowered her. He asked her not what she wanted from him, but what she wanted for herself. Her answer was simple. I want to learn, to grow, to make something of myself, with my own hands. So he created a scholarship fund in her name, the Grace Miller Opportunity Grant, to help low-income workers and their children return to school. Grace was the first recipient. She walked into her first college classroom with her head held high, not as the janitor who kissed the CEO, but as a woman chasing her dream, one page at a time. Meanwhile, Alexander changed too. He started showing up to meetings without a tie. He smiled more, listened more, walked through his building like a man, not a king. When asked about Grace by the press, he simply said, "She taught me that power isn't what you own, it's what you give." They didn't rush into marriage. They didn't need to. They dated slowly, intentionally, like two people finally allowed to breathe. They went to bookstores, quiet cafes, parks where no one cared about last names or net worth. They held hands in public. They kissed at red lights. They laughed like they'd waited their whole lives for it. And when someone would whisper or a stranger would smirk, Alexander would gently pull Grace closer, like a shield and a promise in one. Then came the annual Blackridge Gala. Thousands of guests, investors, journalists, executives from around the globe. Grace, now glowing with quiet confidence, stood on stage in a simple black dress. No diamonds, no designer labels. Just poise, humility, and a small gold locket over her heart. Alexander introduced her. She's not just part of my life. She's part of our future. Then he stepped aside. Grace took a deep breath and spoke. Most people judged me before they knew me. They saw a uniform and decided I wasn't worth more. But kindness doesn't care about money. Love doesn't care about background. And dignity? Dignity doesn't come from a paycheck. It comes from how we treat others, especially when we think no one's watching. The room fell silent. You could hear the clinking of a single spoon against glass. She smiled, eyes shining. I used to mop these floors, praying no one would see me. Now I stand here, proud. Not because I was chosen by a man with power, but because I chose not to give up on myself. Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. And if anyone here still believes love only belongs to the rich, or that worth is measured in wallets, I hope someday you meet someone who proves you wrong, just like Alexander proved it to me, and I proved it to him. The room erupted in applause. The video went viral in less than a day, not because she was glamorous or famous or loud, but because her words cut straight through the noise, simple, honest, and brave. In the months that followed, applications to the scholarship fund tripled. The company launched new programs to support working-class employees. And more importantly, people talked about respect, about love, about the quiet strength of those who clean what others leave behind. Grace and Alexander became more than just a couple. They became a symbol of two worlds that collided, not in scandal, but in sincerity. Of a woman who rose from the shadows without needing to dim someone else's light, and a man who remembered his humanity because someone believed in it again. And though their story began with an accident, A fall, a laugh, and an unforgettable mistake. It ended with a lesson that echoed far beyond the walls of Blackridge. Love doesn't ask for status. It asks for courage. And when two people meet with open hearts, no power on earth can keep them apart. This story is more than romance. It's a lesson to a society that judges people by their clothes, jobs, or bank accounts. Love, respect, and humanity are bigger than money or power. Even the coldest hearts can warm, and even the poorest souls can shine the brightest.